they've adopted a bottom-up cross-functional process whereby the top, it's not about what management thinks, it's all about what the patient thinks and moves up. So they incorporate the patient in terms of when they're making their decisions within the lovely boardroom that we showed you earlier on. So through this, we can see the successful part of the integration of the activities between those four, and ideally the most important being HR and also management in this part here. So in conclusion, we'd just like to say that our lovely Mango model that we used, again, going back to it, we identified the core things, and that's why we use the mango, because it has that core part, and the fleshy side is, the sweeter side just kind of like makes you go through to enter the core, and that's why we use the mango model. So thank you very much.
I'm hungry. Mango. Mango.
Are you guys hungry?
Yeah.
Do you have mango juice for us?
Yeah.
That would be the highlight. Okay. You want to go?
You have to give us mango.
If you could go to the slide with the dimensions of service quality, please. That one, yeah. I really like the way you've picked out the things that matter on the sort of main body of the slide, and then you've talked about ServQual on the other side. How do they link together? Which of these things that you've identified form which parts of ServQual and which are the most important?
Well, okay, in regards to employee attitudes, let's say, certain process needs to be taking place in order to build up the elements of empathy and reassurance. So if that's successful, then I would say they're very good in responsiveness. And in terms of implicit and explicit promises, we can see that tangibility falls into that. It's important, like the implicit part, which is, the implicit part, which is the service tangibles. And word of mouth would be, I would call it, okay, word of mouth, because it's used by the marketing department, and they by their alumni patients. That kind of like, I wouldn't call manipulation because that sounds bad, but that invitation projects commitment to your alumni customers. So that could possibly lead to a positive word of mouth, but it seems like out of the data they found from the questionnaire is that they already have a positive word of mouth. However, it's just a strategy that marketing uses to ensure that there is assurance when the new customers come. In terms of reliability, moments of truth, it's very crucial when you're in the hospital and when you're in contact with a particular aspect of, say, the operational procedure or with the nurse. It's important that it's all about you either satisfied or dissatisfied. That's why it's very important. And that's why I linked it with reliability, because it's all about getting what you want, getting what you're saying that you're going to provide. And we said it earlier, just about past experience. It's something, again, it's something that I wouldn't say it relates to ServQual. It's just something that we thought it's important that builds up with the rest.
Okay. Great, thank you. Sorry, do you want to speak at that?
Can I just push a bit
Yeah.
more on this one? When you talk about ServQual and moments of truth, isn't ServQual the way you measure each moment of truth? So wouldn't I argue that ServQual really is as a result of your ServQual, you assess each moment of truth with an assessment of service quality, okay? And therefore you assess your past experience also through service quality. And if those experiences are good and your assessment of service quality is positive, it then leads to a word of mouth, okay? And for me, this is great, but I'd like to push you. I'd like you to go back and develop this model, because there's an input and there's an output in this model, and I can't see that yet, okay? And also, when you talk about employees' attitudes, it's not attitudes you mean. As a psychologist, this is a behavior, okay? So at the workplace, you need to understand that when you're talking about reassuring behavior, empathetic behavior, it's actually behavior, it's not attitude. We can't measure attitude as easily, okay? So in this, I like this, but I think some of these are input indicators, some of these are output indicators, if you look at it very quantitatively. And serve call, I like that you try to do it, but I think employee attitudes and moments of truth will influence your word of mouth. And implicit and explicit promises will affect when you come into your moment of truth. So in this model, it looks very cyclical.
We're not implying that, I'll be honest, we're not implying that there's a process here.
No, it's not a process. But
Yeah.
what you've confused me in that is that service quality is the way you assess the service at each moment of truth. Okay? An accumulation of service quality affects your overall satisfaction. Right? So at each moment of truth, you're in contact with the patient with operation procedure, it's a moment of truth. And at that moment, you're assessing whether the operation was reliable, whether the surgeon that operated on you, had his credible credentials, whether the operating room was clean, whether the surgeon showed empathy with you, and whether when you said, I need an extra glass of drink, the surgeon or the nurse bring it to you. So I think it just needs a bit more clarity in your understanding of service quality. That service quality is the way you assess the service at each moment of truth.
Yeah, and the reason why we have put it in that way because we have actually, taken into consideration that each one of us have different various levels of expectations.
Yeah.
Various individual differences. We have a way of perceiving things, and there's many confounding variables. And there's something I haven't mentioned during the presentation, but I'll give you an example. Say that when I enter the hospital, I am stressed and frightened.
Good.
So that means my perception will not be as it will not be the same if I'm just calm and feel confident. So that's one confounding variable that an organization will not identify but in this case, show this because actually through the environment they have, they make you feel more confident. So what I'm trying to show here is that we picked as a group the various moments of truth for us as a group. It's the major one because there will be a contact, and that contact will determine the outcome in a way.
Correct.
Will determine the outcome in a way. But this is another confounding variable. This is another confounding variable, and this and this is part of within the work context. So we try to. There's so many scenarios, so we try to bring an
You try
example.
to show an overview.
Yeah.
But I think in showing such an overview, as I've said in all the presentations, is show an overview that may not be confusing. Okay, because you have confounding variables, I get it, but some are input variables and some are output variables.
I understand.
And when you have this, if you were to create an instrument, you'd get into trouble because you're not highlighting
Of course.
which is the input, which is the output variable. Okay, and that's important. Sorry, go to your next question.
My next question is about the gaps, the slide you have with the gaps.
Okay.
The first point, the patient has a role to play during the processes. Why have you got that in gap 2? Why have you got that in
It
gap 2?
relates to in gap 2, it talks about how the design of the customer design standards are in the gap. So ideally what operation does is they try to reduce that gap by embedding the customer in the process, in the design process of the from the moment you enter the hospital to the end. So the customer has a role to play in the entire process, and that's why it's reducing a gap 2. It's their involvement, their role that they have in the operations part of it.
How would you think that might fit more in gap 3 maybe, because that's more about performance and the customer's more involved in what actually happened rather than how they decide what the service will be?
I think for gap 3 it mostly touches on HR. There is the human resources when they're selecting and recruiting, they have to select the right people. If they don't select the right people, they'll have the gap will become wider. Yeah. So once if they don't select the right people, the wider the gap, and that is why they have to select and recruit the right people in this particular gap 3. Yeah. And that's how they've shown evidence through the experienced surgeons and housekeepers and nurses that they've employed.
That was going to be my next question. Why have you only got that in gap 3? Staff, you're only talking about the internal performance in the gap 3 there, aren't you? You're not
Yeah, I'm talking about the five major functional groups within the company, within this hospital, that touches on HR and operations, marketing, and also management.
Okay.
So that's why I've used that to distinguish between the gaps. Yeah, because the gap 2 will affect the customer design standards. Gap 4 will affect external communications. Gap 3 will affect the human resources element of it. And gap 1, it's when the company management and the